Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Bookbind. My name is phoenixrokni. I am the author of The Fall of Magic, first book in the Masterscore series. Today, we're diving into the heart of the story and discussing Aurotos, the central figure in The Fall of Magic and one of the key players who helped set everything into motion for the Masterscore series. Now, I do want to preface that if you have not read book one, I would very much encourage you to stop watching this video or any of the other ones in this series. Make sure that you've read that book before you really dive into any of these, especially this one, because if you don't already know who this character is, you probably shouldn't watch the video yet. So when we first come to learn about Aurotos, we are experiencing him through the viewpoint of his alias, Volier. You learn that he is the last Auron elf, but it isn't really made clear what that means until you come to realize who he is later. When we meet him, he's really trying to dodge all responsibility. He doesn't want the throne, and he feels that as the last of his kind, that perhaps the world would be better off without him really being a player in it and in its future. He feels that as the last of his kind, that perhaps the world is better that way. That's better served with the Thrianathiel stewards doing what they're doing, leading the people, because they've actually been doing a really good job. So he disappears for quite a long time, and he's really focused now on serving in a different way, in a way that allows him to better understand his father. You know, in his mind, he realizes that if he can be chosen by a phoenix, he might have the opportunity to sort of live his life away, get a duty station, take his cats, go live somewhere on the outer reaches of the realm at a tower or something, live out his years that way. But realistically, that would never be possible. And deep down, he does know that he's lying to himself. And as long as the darkness survives, that kind of life really would never be possible for him. The series really is about his lineage and the good and the bad of his ancestors and what they're responsible for. You'll learn as we move into book 2, when it's been thousands of years since the fall, that he's gone, and as such, we'll be following a different main character. But as you'll come to realize, that viewpoint will be one that adds a great deal of perspective to the story, especially regarding the way most view the changes that have happened, and even how Aurotos and his allies' legacy will be regarded. So when we talk about Aurotos and his place in the greater story, we have to really think about how he connects the world's larger conflict of light versus darkness, duty versus choice, and even strife and sorrow versus hope and destiny. Now, his relationships with key characters such as Valathos, Kairis, Armate, Anarian, those are going to help showcase elements related to how his lineage is regarded in the present. The importance to so many that he takes his place in history as the light of hope that people need. We also learn that he's been hiding in plain sight using an enchantment to help cloak him, but it clearly hasn't worked out very well, as people like Valathos have been aware for many years that he's been there. This also goes to show us just how much the Elder Knight respects his decisions in not wanting to reveal himself, even though that decision is turning away from his heritage and his destiny. So let's talk about Aurotos and his choices. His choices in book 1 will ultimately end up costing him the lives of his 2 animal companions. Had he listened in the Tower of Aveston to the sage Kairis, they might be alive. He would not have been in his room for the attempted assassination. His decision to turn away from his people after his parents' death also cost him the opportunity to form friendships, make allies, people who would have been there to aid him over the course of years, and also during a time when the world has come to believe that he must have also perished. The one thing I always think is interesting to think about is, if he had chosen not to disappear, how would the world have been a different place with him in it? It would have looked very different, and it makes you wonder, how would it have looked had he been there versus the Thrianathiel stewards being there, serving in his stead. You know, even his decisions at the end of this book are going to have an impact on the world. Some are for the good, but many are also going to be for the worse. And he is going to ultimately make a decision that will have a lasting impact on the fate of the world. And those first steps are truly going to lead to the unraveling of the Dark Master's plans and schemes. But there will be great cost and sacrifice as a result. And that's something that the readers just simply cannot really come to terms with and fully realize until many books to come. You know, I also talked about how his decisions have had an impact on him in his decision to not be there, in his choices to not, you know, really be who he is and to be honest with himself. He's neglected to be able to form relationships. And that's not something that has gone unnoticed by him or others. He's been very much stoic and a loner, aside from his two animal companions. And there have been relationships that have been there waiting to blossom for him if he had only just been willing to be open to it. But he's so closed off to it. Luckily for him, as he goes on the adventure, reveals who he truly is, he gets to realize that someone like Leavesa, for example, was always someone who gravitated towards him. And at first he has a lot of questions about that, you know, like what is her motives? Like, why is she trying to be, you know, is she really just sort of poking at me? Is she trying to actually befriend me? Is she competing with me? Is she interested in me romantically? These are things that have been going through his mind. I wanted to showcase, at least with one of those knights that he served with, the truth of what she was really trying to be open to with him was. You know, there's a moment in the book when we get to see Leavesa really explain herself and explain, you know, that you weren't alone, and that in him really even having that conversation with her, he gets to realize exactly what he's been missing out on in friendship, and how much he actually has in common with Leavesa and her own past. And that still, for me, brings into question, well, what about the other knights? What about their history? What about their past? What more might he actually have in common with them that he is not fully aware of yet? And in time, we'll get to understand what all those things really are. Before moving into talking about the next point, I want to share this. Yes, he has a love interest. Yes, it did sort of feel like it went fast. In reflection, I could have spent more time on that relationship, and it probably will come off as seeming like the romance was rushed. However, there's something that I didn't really dig into too heavily. And I think once I get into the definitive edition for this book, far into the future, way in the future, I always talk about it, giving it all the bells and whistles it truly deserves. It's not going to change things a ton, but there will be a little bit of added context and relationship building and viewpoint perspective that I think will resolve some of that. But also, there was one component to this story that it leads you to wonder about the idea of soulmate as a construct in this fantasy world. And I hope that someone has been piecing that together, that romance doesn't work quite the same way for especially elves on Auro as it might for humans. You know, there's a component to him. He does realize that Anarian is, well, she's meant for him. And in realizing that for him as an Auron elf, it unlocks feelings in a way that you wouldn't quite see them for maybe some of the other races. And not the way that we really experience love here. There's a love in knowing there's a destiny with someone, and he gets to have a knowing of that with a sense of certainty that we don't always get to experience in our own lives as humans, and certainly other races in the world don't get to experience. Not even the elves, the regular elves, get to experience that. Anarian has always had a perspective on her own romance, and when we get to do the definitive edition, I think her blooming perspective won't feel so rushed either. There's something very specific that she loves and has always envisioned in someone. And she's been so grounded in knowing what that is, as he has, that they weren't kidding themselves and it wasn't infatuation when they felt that way. And it was important to them that they both made sure the other person knew what they were feeling and that it was real before they really got to explore what that relationship was. And trust me, you'll get to in the future. And I hope that when that time comes, that will add some perspective into the idea of, well, how could they feel this way so fast? Anyway, let's talk about what Aurotos represents in the Master's Core series as a whole. Something greater than he will be aware of. There's something coming in the future. People may not believe it or be ready for it. And his role in that future, it will be very important. If he can only stay the course to see it realized, then maybe Auro has a chance of overcoming the darkness. Still, it will cost him and many others something they may not be willing to sacrifice. And if they aren't willing, and if it doesn't happen, then unfortunately all truly will be lost. He's a tether to the past, to the divinity of the gods, but he's also a tie to something divine in the future that will be necessary. Now, his role as Knight of the Phoenix and the importance of the fire and the light in this book and in the future, there's so much we could talk about with this. There's so much we could talk about his link to Aur, but I think I'm going to save that because I know I'm explaining some of this stuff in book 2. There is a very strong component of fire and light in this book that he embodies, that being a Knight of the Phoenix embodies. And when we think about what that's going to mean in the future, we need to kind of go really far back in time and think about the twin flames, the gods, right? They are beings of light, of the ethereal Essa. And, there are 2 suns in this world, okay? And there are 2 souls that can unify and be one and the same. And that idea of one and the same, of 2 becoming one, being one and the same, is something that we don't fully realize in book 1. I think that as future books go forward, you will definitely start to see that. But I hope that there was some commonality that was felt by everyone or understood and realized in everyone. But this idea of fire and the light being one and the same is extremely important, because Knights of the Phoenix around this time, they're the only ones that can wield fire in the way they do. Solar shields are forms of light. That's the early steps into the development of the paladin. Paladins of Auro do not exist yet. As we learn at the end of book 1, Order of the Imperial Blade gets formed. Valathos, he's going to have someone there to help him, someone to help guide him. Not only a phoenix, but a scholar, a person who knows some things. Something else has been passed down to that person. There's an important component to how Aurotos embodies this balance of mortality and divinity that's showcased in loss and in the enduring truth of the light. Fragility and resilience is also something that we get to see thematically. His name, Aurotos, means the light of Auro. And his title is given to him by the people is the last light of Auro. That's what he's been called. He's truly the last light of the gods in the body of an Auronian. There are other Aurothan creatures that may carry that kind of divine light. As we learn later, Aur carries the light of the gods, but how exactly does that tie our hero to the first Phoenix? We'll come to see how deep that really is in due time. When we were in the early pages of the book, you might have noticed the times where he was aware of the shadow being cast on the ground. That was a type of foreshadowing of Aur, who was truly biding his time, waiting for the moment. And some people might have deduced that maybe Aur was there, fate bound to a moment in time when it was its turn to reappear, to be there, to guide Aurotos when the other mentor character disappears. The first Phoenix was awaiting that moment when his spark was fully ready for their unity and companionship, to be one, unified in the future. Aur came at the moment that was exactly right. just at the moment when our hero was willing to give up everything for Auro. A moment that truly begins to turn the wheel against the Dark Master and will continue to do so for quite some time to come. He starts off isolated, feeling alone. He was fighting against destiny instead of embracing it. Once he was ready to own what his path was and truly embody all he could be, he found himself supported and beloved in ways he never expected. And that proves that even amidst the gloom, hope exists. But the question of whether or not hope will be rewarded or punished by fate, well, that remains to be seen. So Aurotos is the character who carries us through the fall of magic, but his story is only just beginning. While he slumbers, we enter into a truly dark age for Auro, a point when the Dark Master's grip on the planet is greater than ever imagined possible, and as such, the world will change dramatically when we see it next. Now, what are your thoughts about Aurotos so far? What do you think his choices will mean for the future of Auro? I'd love to hear about it. Next time in Behind the Bookbind, we'll be taking a look at Lord Grindom, servant of the Dark Master, traitor of Auro. I'd like to invite you all to join our small but growing Discord. It's a great place for anyone who's interested in nerding out about the world of Auro as much as I am. You'd all be welcome there. And until next time, take care of yourselves and may the light guide you. I'll see you again real soon.